Ahoy, and welcome in to another mind expanding episode of Not Allowed to Die, your podcast about mental health, where I, Dan Megler, social worker and life enthusiast, answer your questions about mental health and talk about the dilemmas that I'm seeing in my practice, both as a school social worker and a therapist in private practice. Alongside me, as always, is Mariska, the three-toothed Patterdale Terrier. And Mariska is licking her paws a little bit. Today, actually, she did something new. She hid her paws underneath a rug, which I'd never seen, but I think I know why. Mariska and I were communing, and she loves it when you rate the podcast. She loves it when you review the podcast. But she has not seen as many of you following the podcast. And remember, when you follow it, you just get it automatically, and all Mariska's wisdom comes to you. Of course, she also wants me to remind you that we are doing this podcast in part to bring attention to Pause for Patrick. So if you know a young person who could benefit from an emotional support animal, tell people to go to pauseforpatrick.org. Also, if you are a therapist or a person who would be interested in volunteering, we can always use your help. So go to pauseforpatrick.org and click on the button to become a volunteer. Now, Mariska is incredibly excited tonight because you know what she loves more than anything? She loves a guest. And she loves a guest particularly. Mariska is very creative, who focus on creativity. So tonight, we're going to get ready to dive into the captivating world of Tyler Wittkofsky. This talented individual hails from the enchanting southern coast of North Carolina. Tyler's not your average writer. He's a multi-genre maestro, crafting stories that will whisk you away on unforgettable adventures. But that's not all. He's also a passionate podcaster, mental health advocate, and travel blogger. Together with his wife Grace and their furry companions Dutch and Belle, Tyler embarks on an awe-inspiring journey across the United States, documenting every thrilling moment on the enthralling blog Adventure with Coffee. Prepare to be captivated by Tyler's first novella, quote, Not Alone, a touching tale inspired by true events surrounding the struggles of mental illness. Love takes center stage in his debut romance novel, The Seeds of Love, Sunflower Kisses Book 1, where a mentally ill young man navigates the complexities of love. And if you're a fan of powerful poetry, his collection, Coffee, Alcohol, and Heartbreak, will strike a chord with its emotionally charged verses, born from 4 transformative years. As a beacon of hope and transparency, Tyler shares his personal mental health journey on his website, www.tylerwittkofsky.com. But he doesn't stop there. He co-hosts the engaging Cook the Books podcast, where he dives into the exciting world of writing and publishing. Adding another feather to his cap, Tyler is the visionary behind Tea with Coffee Media, a small independent publishing company dedicated to sharing untold stories that deserve to be heard. Not only does Tyler conquer the creative realm, but he also shines an award-winning marketing and communications professional. His exceptional skills have earned him numerous accolades, including the prestigious Wilmington Biz Journal's Top 100 Award. In 2020, he fearlessly launched the Wittkofsky Company, an online startup and nonprofit marketing and public relations firm that aims to make a positive impact in the world. Ready to join Tyler on his thrilling journey? Connect with him on social media at Tyler Wittkofsky and explore his captivating body of work at http link.tr.ee/Wittkofsky. Get ready for a roller coaster ride of inspiration, emotion, and unforgettable stories. So sorry for that long intro, Tyler, but thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I have a lot going on, so it's a mouthful to introduce my last name and what I do. So
Well, so part of that Go bio, you talk, there are a lot of different things that we're going to get into tonight, but would you tell us a little bit about how you got into this process of writing and sharing as a creative and harnessing your mental health struggles in being able to turn that into your writing?
yeah, my grandmother has been my biggest inspiration in my life as far as creativity goes. She was an English teacher for high school whenever I was born, and she was later my elementary school principal. She taught me so much about writing and taught me to love writing. She was a beacon of hope in my life growing up. Um, I didn't have the best childhood, had some struggles growing up. And, ultimately at the end of the day, I had my mom, my grandma, my grandpa, and my brother. And, they were the ones who gave me that beacon of hope. And so whenever I got to the point where I wanted to actually write a book, I had taken a break from writing for a few years after college. Whenever you're writing technical work and writing for college, it's not quite as fun. So writing becomes a task and moved back in with my grandmother, and she started talking. I was building a house and moved in with her, and she started asking me about my writing. And eventually I was like, you know what, I'm going to write something. I didn't know what, but one day I was headed home from my job at the time, and I had this epiphany, and I was like, I'm going to write a book about my mental health struggles. And it only made sense to highlight the people in my life, like my mom, my stepdad, my brother, my friends, my fiance, my grandparents, who were the beacons of light in my life, who were the ones that got me through those dark struggles, because I understood how hard it was to really come out of your shell at that point and to be vulnerable. And then also at the same time, it was hard to see that there was a light. It was like a stormy night. Even though there's a lighthouse shining its light, you may not be able to see it as clearly as it is on a clear day. So being able to jump into that adventure and tell that story, at first it was just supposed to be a story to show to my family and my friends who were inspired the book, and they all told me the same thing. They were like, you need to publish this, you need to publish this. And so that was where my inspiration came from. It all comes down to my grandma, but ultimately my support system has been what gave me the courage, the strength, and the motivation to tell my story through writing.
When one of the things that always comes up for me when I read these powerful memoirs or people who are sharing their things is there are people who inspire us, but there are also people often in our lives who have hurt us. And how, as a writer and a creative, do you negotiate that fear of exposing things and people? Like, it's one thing for you to feel comfortable telling your own story, but were there family members or were there people, or was it a hard thing for you to negotiate even as you were writing? How much of this do I share? How much do I need to hold back because I'm not sure how comfortable everyone else would be with my truth?
I used a very fictionalized version of my life whenever I wrote the story. So it's based on true events, but it's not a memoir per se.
Hmm.
And I was very much on the side of wanting to show the hope side of it and not necessarily the hurt side. Now, whenever we get to my second book, The Seeds of Love, which is the beginning of the Sunflower Kisses series, that one explores a young man who was hurt in his past, both emotionally and physically, and is now trying to overcome that as a man in a society where you're looked down on if you have emotions and have feelings and show vulnerability. So that one, again, I think all of my writing is inspired a little bit by my life and by true events. So for that one, there are people in there who are inspired by people who have hurt me in my life. Definitely, not going to say any names because I don't want to, bring them down, because a lot of the people who have hurt me in my past are not the same people that they were in my past, just like I'm not the same person I was in my past. We all can change, and just because you hurt me in the past doesn't mean you are incapable of being loved by me. I just am going to love you from a distance.
Hmm. I think about any book, like, I don't know if you've read much Pat Conroy, but he talks a lot about in his books, like, there's always characters who've been abused and then still, and I think the reason they resonate so clearly is because there's this authenticity that runs through them. When as a therapist, I'm often encouraging people to write, to journal. But many of them will say, gosh, even being alone with my own thoughts and seeing these feelings on a piece of paper, even if they're fictionalized, is very vulnerable. As you're going through your writing process, were you in therapy, or were you like, who was maybe a spotter for you that, like, after you'd had a hard day of writing or really sharing some personal kind of stuff, that you could bounce ideas off of or get that support with, because that's really opening and touching some raw nerves sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, actually, I wasn't in therapy until very recently. I lost my grandfather and joined grief therapy and moved on from there into some more childhood trauma therapy. So that, we can get in that a little bit later, but therapy has been huge for me recently. But back then, my therapy was people like my wife,
Mm.
somebody who I was comfortable with, who I would say is my safe person that I could
Mhm.
go to after one of those long, stressful days and say, hey, here's what I just wrote about. Here's how I'm feeling right now. And she would be there to comfort me, to make me feel better. At the time, she was just my fiance. So, we weren't married. She didn't have the sacred promise to me to take care of me. She didn't have to do that, but she still did. And I have another friend, Taylor, who is inspired by or inspired the character Bella in Not Alone. And she was one of my safe people too. She was very strong and very close to me. She supported me throughout the entire time. Her and I were very, very close at the time, and we I was able to get, explore those deeper emotions with her, because she also struggles with mental health issues, whereas my wife does not.
Hmm.
So she understood things a little bit more, and she was able to connect with me and help me on my journey, writing that book. So I didn't go to a therapist in the traditional sense, but I used therapy, a form of therapy, in my friends and family.
But again, it sounds so fantastic that you've had from your grandmother to his friend to your fiance, then wife, these people that you could share your writing with. But for you, is there still a point, even at this stage of your career, where you get a little anxiety before you're before somebody reads something that like gets pretty personal for you?
Yeah, I actually just released a book that was my first time diving into non-binary pronouns, and schizophrenia
Hmm.
was the mental illness that I focused on that. And I do not personally am not personally diagnosed with schizophrenia, but did a lot of research on it and wanted to incorporate a different kind of mental illness into my writing. And I was very nervous about that because that is a very raw subject, and you can, you have to be very sensitive with what you say and how you say it, and ensure that you're giving an accurate portrayal of this mental illness that is not exaggerated and made to look negative or romanticized.
Hmm.
Even, I mean, there are times where mental illnesses is romanticized in writing and arts and things like that. And um, you know, it's one of those things where you put it all together.
Hmm. And I think it's just to your point, like there are bits of media that become very popular, from Rain Man to As Good as It Gets, where okay, so for so many people out there, okay, that's what autism is, or that's what OCD is, and people's individual experiences with schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever, just like everything else, it's a range of different things. So I would imagine that's got to be. Did you, like, in your research, did you talk to some people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, or how did you feel like you were doing a job of authentically capturing some of those voices?
Yeah, I talked to several people, interviewed people, and I that is also a very hard thing because you have to be sensitive with the questions that you ask.
Hmm.
Because even as somebody, I don't have schizophrenia like I mentioned, but I am bipolar, and there are certain questions that you can ask somebody with a mental illness or any illness really that can hurt them unintentionally. So you have to be very careful with the way you approach researching it and asking people these questions. But yeah, I definitely interviewed about four different people, talked to four different people who experienced schizophrenia that I met through sites like the Mighty, and social media communities like the writing community on Twitter, and the Bookstagram community on Instagram. So just putting together those communities, and I think, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, again, but and I think another, like, did you have anybody after you written it? Did you have any of them read it to give you
Oh,
feedback and comments?
yes.
Hmm.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I had some beta readers that we did, that read through it, and we actually, part of the non-binary, we used a Fay Fair pronoun in that particular book, and we have an author at our Tea with Coffee Media company who uses the Fay Fair pronoun in their real life.
Hmm.
So we used Fair Experience and gave Fair a copy of the book to read through, and gave it to other people who used non-binary terms so that they could also see how we were using, make sure we were using it right. Same thing with the schizophrenic aspect. I was able to, the same people that I interviewed, gave them copies of the book, the final book, after it was edited, and had them go through it, sensitivity read it, make sure everything was accurate. But yeah, I think it's really important to do that research, to interview people, to find out people's real experiences. And like you said, everybody experiences it so differently that you need to interview more than one person. You need to talk to more than one person to get their experience on this, because without that, I mean, experience is everything
Hmm.
at the end of the day. And you want to make your writing as authentic as possible, and utilizing experience in that is something is truly a very valuable tool in your writer tool belt.
But now, no matter what, I mean, anything that has a flavor, some people are going to like that flavor, and some people are going to be like, not for me. Unfortunately, with when people put out something that's creative in a project, people who are like, well, if they disagree with it, they sometimes are attacking. What was your first experience? And maybe you've never had this, but with people who are being just really critical in a maybe even a mean-spirited way of like of the things that you've put out there. How does that, especially when it's so personal and tied back to things of like of your own life experience? Have you had to deal with like much negative comments and criticisms online or no?
Yeah, I think I'll never forget the first 1 star review. It wasn't even a review, it was just a rating that I got on Goodreads on my poetry collection, Coffee, Alcohol, and Heartbreak, which was a very raw and authentic poetry collection that I wrote during my darkest battles with mental illness when I was unmedicated and undiagnosed. And so whenever I got that 1 star rating with no review, no explanation, nothing, it broke my heart. It shattered me. I was sitting at my computer at work, and I remember pulling it up on my phone or getting the email from my on my phone and checking it, and I was like, just I had to go home for the day. I was immediately defeated, and you know I think I've definitely grown as a person as and an author in that aspect, to where now the 1 star, 2 star, 3 star reviews don't bother me anymore because they're part of every author's life. I mean,
Hmm.
you go and look at Stephen King's Amazon and Goodreads, he's got 1 star, 2 star, 3 star reviews, just as many as, if
Hmm.
not more than anybody else.
Hmm.
So, you're not, like you said, you're not going to please everybody. And that was a lesson that I had to learn, not only in writing, but in life, because I think I was a very people pleaser
Hmm.
whenever I was going, I think whenever I was going through my the beginning of my career, and I really just wanted to please everybody. And eventually, I had to learn that that wasn't doable. It wasn't realistic. That you have to kind of build the tide that you're gonna rise your ship up on.
Hmm.
Surround yourself with the people who you want to see succeed and who want to see you succeed.
Yeah, and I think that and recognizing that you're not everybody is supposed to be your audience. If every there is nobody who everybody likes. And I think even tackling topics and characters who have different pronouns, already well, a certain percentage of our country is just going to be against what I'm writing because they don't like the fact that I acknowledge there are people who use other than the binary pronouns. And so that's got to be, we have to thicken our skin if we're ever going to produce anything. Um, is there advice that you give? Like, do you find yourself like in chat? Like, are you involved with like a group of authors and chat group of people, like where like you help to read each other's work with other creatives, or do you mostly stick with family and that kind of thing for your feedback?
So whenever I was doing the indie author route and was
Mm.
self-publishing, yeah, it was mainly just using my friends and family for their feedback and their beta reading skills. And then I moved into meeting people via Twitter and other social media sites, to where I was building that writing community and was able to meet other writers and editors and other creatives who had more experience and know-how in the industry that could look over my work. And now with Tea with Coffee Media, we provide editing services and book marketing and cover design formatting services to indie authors, not just authors that we are publishing, but any indie author out there we offer our services to at a very reasonable price. And for our authors, it's free. We completely take care of all of that for them. We have a Tea with Coffee club, which is a club of beta readers. People can apply for that on our website, and they are sent the books. Every book that comes out, they are sent a ebook copy and entered in to win physical PR boxes. We have a group of partners such as podcasters, YouTubers, TikTokers, bloggers, and other influencer types like that who we partner with to help promote our authors and to read our, again, they're kind of like our beta readers as well, but they use their platform to promote our authors as well. And we use ours to promote them. So again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, choosing who is around you and rising that tide together. So that's what we're working to do, is build that community of people, so that I know what it was like whenever I first started this journey and was unable to, or it was hard to navigate these waters myself. So now I want to be that beacon of light for other indie authors and new writers who want to have that experience a little bit easier than I did.
So I know a number of people who are listening to this are talented writers and they've got a story to tell. So what would you say, okay, what's the next step? If they, like, let's say they haven't written, they had stuff that they wrote 12 years ago and they haven't really looked at it. Would you say, okay, the first step is just go dust off those files and comb through it a little? Would you say, go to like your site or whatnot and try to find some beta readers? Like, what would you encourage as next steps for people who they know they've got a story to tell and they know they've got this powerful message? What would you encourage them to do?
you know, if that story's not written, then just write it.
Hmm.
I know it sounds so hard, but once you sit down and set aside, 15, 30 minutes a day to just do nothing but write. I mean,
Hmm.
15, 30 minutes, we spend that scrolling on our phones mindlessly through TikTok or other social media. And so being able to sit down and put word to paper is something that's going to get you to where you need to be. And that's how you get your story told. Now, if you've already written the story and you wrote it 12 years ago, go back through it. Use things that you've learned since then. We talked about those experiences earlier. Use those experiences that you've gained since you first wrote that manuscript to polish on it and to improve upon it. Then start looking for writers or readers in your community, whether they're friends, family. You could start groups on Facebook for other writers or other readers who are looking for books. There's so many free options out there with social media that, being able to just put word to paper and then get it in front of people and tell your story, that's one of the most empowering things that you can do as a creative soul.
Yeah, and I think if you know that what you have, your story that you have to tell is too personal, I'm guessing that you can use these other people to help you to fictionalize it, to make it, move it a little bit away from too personal a thing, so that it doesn't feel like you're overexposed. How about, often when we start to process through some of the things we've dealt with, in therapy, we always say, don't open a door that you can't close. Are there any techniques that you use for yourself to kind of get back to a calm place, to kind of ground yourself after opening up and touching into, some more difficult topics for you and some negative experiences?
I think utilizing my senses and sensory therapy is one of my biggest assets. Is I really like smell and using scents to bring me back down to if I use a pumpkin smell to bring me to the fall time, or a cookie smell to bring me to my grandma's kitchen, something like that, to bring me away from that traumatic moment that I'm working on, or using my sense of feel to grab something like a squishmallow or a pillow and just squeeze it, hold it close to you, or even a person, pulling them in close and letting their warmth bring you back to reality. Um, Also, music and sound therapy has been huge for me, using sounds like uh, rain and waves and wind, and white noises. So I really like relying on my senses to bring me back to a sense state where I feel stable after writing those raw and emotional moments.
Yeah, and so I think it's a good idea for people to know what those things are that help ground them. So before you start your writing about even the most boring parts of it, have your things ready to go, because I'm sure you've experienced, sometimes you think you're going to start writing one direction and the writing starts taking you another down another path. And so always be ready to know how to close that door once you open it. Now, it sounds like in addition to the writing, the marketing, all these other creative endeavors, like, how do you strike your balance between keeping enough time for writing and to also promoting these other things that you're interested in? How do you divide your kind of life and your energy and bandwidth up among the writing and then the other things?
Yeah, I kind of alluded at it earlier, but it's something called writing sprints is how
Mhm.
I like to write. So again, it goes back to setting aside that 15, 20, 30 minutes and doing nothing but writing for that time and seeing how many words you can get down in that time period. And after the 15 minutes is up, there are different applications that you can use on your computer, you can find on the internet or use on programs like Discord. You can use your phone and just set a timer. And as soon as that timer goes off, I just stop writing. And that's, even if I'm in the middle of a sentence, I stop writing and I come back to it. And if it doesn't make sense, then I redo that sentence. But if it didn't make sense to me and then I couldn't put it down in that 15 minutes or that 30 minutes, whatever it was, then it obviously wasn't meant to be. It wasn't good enough for me to remember initially, so it wouldn't be good enough for somebody reading it to remember.
Mhm.
So I just try to set aside dedicated time for my writing, and everything in my life is I'm very scheduled. Rely on calendars. I have calendars on my laptop, my phone. Used to have them on my desk and my wall before we sold our house and moved into an RV. Now, very little room, so make do with what you can. But organization has been a huge thing for me. I'm very, very organized. Keeping things compartmentalized too has been a huge lesson, especially whenever it comes to maintaining that work-life balance. Because a lot of my work feels like creativity and life, but it's not. It's still work. So I have to remember that whenever I'm sitting down at the end of the night and separate that from spending time with my wife and my dogs.
Mhm. Well, I think that's, whether a person is doing something creative or starting a business or anything, we have to we have to pay our bills, we have to regulate and take care of ourselves. And but then saying it's if it's only 10% of our week is dedicated to our creative endeavors, that's okay. If we're going ahead and as long as we're doing something, we're putting some part of our week. But then also, I love the fact that you've got your routines, you've got your structure. Because for any of us with any kind of mental health struggles, when we're not keeping that structure together, we're more likely to get into a place where we're out of balance. And when we're out of balance, we're not going to be productive long term. Often, we hear the cliches of the writers who are tapping into alcohol or drugs or whatnot to touch certain emotions. But if we're doing that, that's not probably going to be very long term sustainable. So for you, do you try to like really say, okay, I can't, I make sure that when I'm in a writing place, like mentally, I've got everything around me and I'm in a super clear head? Or do you have any thoughts about like those kind of pieces?
Yeah, I mean, if I get into a point where I'm really in a writing mood, I will set aside the time to go for it and write it.
Hmm.
Especially if it's for a personal project.
Hmm.
For example, I'm working on one called The Principles now, inspired by my grandmother.
Okay.
And there are times where I will write 15, 20, 30 pages in one sitting on that book because I get so inspired by it. And, like you said, that's okay. Like the organization is great to have and the structure is great to have, but sometimes you need to have fun and you need to bend the rules and bend
Hmm.
that organization a little bit. So it's okay to, jump out of your habit and then jump back into habit after you get done with that creativity, because you might as well use that creative boost while you have it, when you have it. Because any creative knows that creative boosts come and go, and there's no rhyme or reason for when they come and when they go.
For so many people in every career, imposter syndrome is a big issue. I think, particularly for people who are, whether they're singers, dancers, writers, or whatever, this idea of what's making me think that what I have to share is important enough or it's going to resonate with anyone. So, for you, like any tips or advice that you give to people about when they're having that negative voice pop up in their head? It's like, okay, they're devoting all this time and they might be thinking, nobody's ever going to want to read this. So, what do you say back to that negative voice?
I actually struggled with this up until about a year ago. Really, really struggled with it. And a friend of mine, Kelsey Lovelady, who is my vice president of marketing for Tea with Coffee Media, we were talking one night and she told me, she's like, I want you to do something. She said, I want you to name the voice in your head. And so I named the voice, and she said, so every time that voice tells you something, I want you to yell, cuss, scream, and everything you can to get it to stop, in your head while saying that name.
Hmm.
So I started that practice, and it gave a personalized experience to where I had a rival now,
Hmm.
and I could take out my frustrations on this figurative being that I had created in my mind. And it wasn't me that I was fighting anymore. Because at
Hmm.
the end of the day, if you feel like you're fighting yourself, well, are you ever going to win? Because you're going to lose one way or another. Whereas if you create this new being and this separate entity from yourself, you can feel like it's beatable. You can feel like you can win and not lose at the same time.
Hmm. And what I often say to my clients is, I like them to envision, that the old devil and angel on your shoulder type thing. And but as more of a coach. One's a negative coach and one's a positive coach. And realizing that that negative voice, that negative side of us, it's there to try to protect us. But all it cares about is limiting the amount of pain we experience. It doesn't care about getting that good story out. It doesn't care about the fact that you could have something amazing to say that might really touch one person and move their life forward. All it cares about is limiting your chances of embarrassment. And so if you're going to listen to that negative coach, you're going to live a very small life. You're never going to do much of anything. And so the more that we can tap into that, everybody does have something interesting about them. But I personally can't do what you can do and what so many other people listening can do. I can't create a narrative. I can't create characters. I can't do any of those things. So I'm so grateful to you and all those people who can do that. So if you're one of those people out there who can create a character and create a story, that's a rare skill. How old do you think you were when you realized that? Because so many people just kind of they minimize their skill because they're like, well, everybody can do that. When did you realize that everybody can't do that? Not everybody can like have the stamina to write a book.
Um, Probably right around the time I finished my first book. Whenever I finished my first book and started telling people that, and they were like, "You did what?" I was like, "Oh, I didn't think it was a big deal because it wasn't for me." But whenever I was going around telling people, and they're like, "That's incredible," and I'm like, "Is it really?" And then I started looking up, the percentage of books that actually get published and make it to Amazon or make a bestsellers list or whatever it may be. And I was like, wow, like it is a lot that goes into it. And I started to learn the different, I've always been big into school but my subjects and English was something that I was burnt out on by the time I got to high school. So I had stopped listening and caring about the basic English rules and grammar rules. And so after I finished my first book and started looking into those types of things and saw what my editor was changing in my book, it amazed me that I was even able to craft that without that prior experience or prior knowledge or expertise on the writing subject. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I do have something here. Maybe I am have a talent that I need to tap into and learn more. So I took advantage of that and started honing my skills to the point where I still have imposter syndrome. I mean, I think, like you said, everybody has imposter syndrome. It's something that's going to happen, but it doesn't happen as frequently now. And I think that's one of the most exciting things. But having that imposter syndrome and fighting that, you know, you come together, and at the end of the day, you succeed despite the imposter syndrome.
Mhm. Well, I think for anybody who's listening to this, most of the people are interested in mental health, and most of us have difficulty accepting compliments, and we have difficulty believing when people. But I guess I'll tell you this: if anybody's ever told you that you're a good writer, they're not making that up for no reason. They're not selecting that because they just think. So if you're hearing this and somebody's told you you've got a story to tell, your writing moves me, please keep writing, please keep sharing, and get your things out there. Now, writing is one of the areas where people, the more experience they get, the better they tend to get. So do you feel like what area do you feel like you've grown the most since you've kind of started this journey as a writer? What skill area do you feel like you've developed yourself most in compared to when you were younger?
I would say my showing versus telling skills have completely gone off the charts compared to my first. I actually just redid Not Alone, and I'm going to re-release it as a full-length novel in October.
Okay.
And so I redid that, and what I saw a lot of was that I was telling more of the story than I was showing the reader. So I went through and used a lot of what I've learned from writing The Seeds of Love, from writing my most recent book, Potent. And for I've been published in several anthologies for short stories. So I was able to take all of that editing feedback that I've had, that professional editing feedback,
Hmm.
and use it in this new novel and develop it into a whole new story. And I'm really excited to share it with the world because especially the people who have already read the novella version, I'm giving away free copies to everybody who has a copy of the novella version so that they can read it and give me their feedbacks and tell me what they think of this story and be able to say, you know what, like this is the path, this is how you grow, this is how you become better.
Do you feel that the writing is continually? Do you feel like it is an ongoing process of helping you heal from some of your pain, negative experiences?
Oh yeah, yeah. Writing is definitely a form of therapy for me. It is one of those things that I use it to. While yes, it is there for obviously there is a money aspect for it for many people. For me, it's much more than that. It's about freeing my soul and opening up who I am and allowing myself to be vulnerable. And by telling my story, I'm telling my truth and being able to say, this is who I am and be proud of who I am. I'm learning to love myself more and more with every book that I put out. And I think that's part of the writing journey that's so beautiful. And the creative journey, really, for any creative, is that you're able to heal from those past traumas and rely and not rely, but use those past traumas as motivation and use it to throttle you forward and succeed and to success.
Have you ever brought any of your writing into your therapy sessions to like actually process with your therapist, or not so much doing more of that with like your wife and whatnot?
I actually get whenever I wrote my first book, I gave my psychiatrist a copy of my book. Have not brought any of my writing into my current therapy sessions, but um, may not be a bad idea to pass that along and just see what her thought. Actually, we did have a conversation about my book because whenever I passed along my rewrite of Not Alone to some beta readers, I got feedback that a lot of the symptoms were synonymous with borderline personality disorder.
Hmm.
And obviously, the book is based off of my real life experiences. I've never been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder until very recently, where I talked to my therapist, and she was like, "Yeah, a lot of what your symptoms are very well aligned with it." And now I'm being or not diagnosed, but my psychiatrist is looking at that as a possibility to add on to my treatment.
And that's really the function of diagnosis. So many people get upset when they think, okay, because we never want a diagnosis to be a label that says, oh, you are this, you have this. But when it can help drive treatment and say, hey, maybe you might because, and it's so awesome that a reader reached out and said, hey, you might, based on this cluster of symptoms that you're talking about, maybe this other treatment might be helpful to you. Because that's really the point. The point of diagnosis is to help the professionals say, hey, maybe we should try a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that. And so I think that's pretty incredible. And I can just say, as a therapist, I love it. And if any of you are listening, like, I love it when people bring in their writing and they share that because it can give, it's almost like doing dream analysis with a person or when a person brings in their artwork, where we can see sometimes things that a person might not say, but little pieces of their subconscious get revealed and it takes therapy in a new direction. The great therapist Irvin Yalom would often say to people every few weeks, when was the last time you challenged yourself in here? And I think often bringing in a different perspective into the therapy office can do that. And sometimes through a person's writing, you might be sharing something with your therapist that you didn't even realize you were doing. So yeah. So anything else that you would like to share with again our audience about just how the intersection of creativity, writing, and mental health, and how those all come across for you, and anything else you'd just like to put forward?
I think the most important thing to me is to remind people that writing can be used as a career, but it can also be used as something that heals your soul. A lot of people with mental health issues have what they feel like is a broken soul. And being able to heal that soul and put together the pieces through your writing or through your art, through your creativity, that's one of the most empowering aspects of being a creative, of being alive, of being a person and enjoying life. So don't ever let anybody tell you that you're not good enough. I was told that I was not good enough for my entire childhood. I was told that, because of my bipolar that I would not be amount to anything, that I wouldn't be successful. And despite that, here I am. I've received over 5 awards for my over the past 6 years for my work as a marketing and communications professional. I've served in numerous roles, owned companies, published books. Despite all of my setbacks in life, despite all of the people telling me that I wouldn't do it, I still did it. And if anybody out there is wondering if you're good enough to do it, yes, you absolutely are good enough to succeed, to fight forward, and to keep going.
And if one person sees the writing and the things that you share, if one person sees a drawing, a painting that you've done, and it resonates with them, the fact that you brought it out and you share with it, that can be life transformational. And so many of you who are listening to this right now, you've got it inside you, you've got something to share, and it is valuable. And I always say, wisdom is knowledge gained through life experience, and it comes at a terrible cost. And so many of you have earned that wisdom. And it sounds like Tyler, particularly. I mean, your career is, I think you've got many decades to go in your career, and there's a lot more wisdom that you're going to be sharing. And I never would have put young Tyler through all the things that you had to go through to get here. But now that you're taking that, it's really inspirational the way you're sharing it and then helping others to be able to share their story as well. So, one more time, where should we encourage people if they want to get the books, if they want to learn more about you, or just any more about the process of encouraging? Let's send them one more time. Where should they go to check those things out?
Yeah, so I am at Tyler Wittkofsky, Wittkof, as in Frank, S as in Sally, KY, on all social media. You can find my website, tylerwittkofsky.com, or my link tree, linktr.ee/Wittkofsky. And that will bring you to all of my links, my businesses, my social media, my blogs. That has everything. So, highly recommend getting a link tree if you're a creative out there and have a lot of things to promote. So
And we'll have links to some of this stuff in the show notes underneath. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today. And for any of you who are listening, and remember, if you have questions for Mariska and for me, email us at dmaiglerlcsw@gmail.com and do whatever it takes to get you through this world. Remember, you are just not allowed to die.